Do we really need as many remakes as we keep getting? These days it really feels like the majority of games that get announced every year are at least a remake, sometimes a remaster, and at the very bare minimum a sequel. It seems kind of rare that we get a brand new standalone IP these days, especially one that actually succeeds. In this video, I want to talk about remakes, remasters, whether they're warranted, cases where it's a good thing, cases where it's a bad thing, and just that sort of general discussion, really. Remasters have been happening for a really long time now. Some remasters are 20 years old. One of the best remasters I think I've ever played was the remaster of the original Resident Evil, the one for the GameCube that was then remastered again for modern consoles, I think in 2016. And in my eyes, that being one of the oldest remakes or remasters that I can remember, it's also one of the best because it rebuilt the game from the ground up. I think sometimes people can get confused between the distinction between a remake and remaster. In my head, the definition is remaster is the same game re-released but upscaled for modern hardware and playable in modern day on an easier console. A remake is something that's ground up, do it all again, inspired by the original. Brilliant example of one of the best remakes we've ever had that released rather recently was the Resident Evil 4 remake. That is a brilliant example of a remake done well. For the most part, not counting Resident Evil 3, the Resident Evil remakes are some of the best remakes that we've ever gotten, and I would argue they all have a place and deserve to exist. And the reason for that is because that they're doing something that a lot of remakes and remasters are not. They're making a game that was previously difficult to play in modern day playable again. I think that is the best case scenario when it comes to a remake. I am not a fan of a remake or a remaster of a game that is fine as it is and is very easily playable in modern day. A good example of this would be The Last of Us Remastered. While I understand why they did The Last of Us Remake, the remaster on PlayStation 4 looked just fine and is very easily playable today. An example of a game that is not very easily playable today that's being remade soon, Silent Hill 2. All of the Silent Hill games are pretty much abandoned at this point. I have been collecting them in physical form for the last year or so, and they're only going up in price. If you want to get your hands on a copy of the original Silent Hill 2, it's starting to get expensive. Go look it up, let alone trying to get your hands on a copy of each one. For example, the only Silent Hill game that I'm currently missing from my physical collection is Silent Hill Origins. It is the PSP one, however it was also released for the PlayStation 2. I would prefer to have the PlayStation 2 version because it would be more easily playable for me, but the PlayStation 2 version of Silent Hill Origins is £90, or it was when I last looked, and that's crazy. So when a game like that, like a game like Silent Hill, gets remade and remastered for a modern audience on modern consoles, that is always a win because it's bringing the older game, making it accessible to the newer generation, and in reality is actually cheaper because of the scarcity of the original game. The opposite of that is true with things like Last of Us Remastered, where The Last of Us Remake is the same price as a full-priced game. In fact, I think it's actually more expensive than the majority of games. What does a new game cost these days? Like $54.99 all the way up to about £70? I'm pretty sure that The Last of Us Remake, The Last of Us Part 1, trends towards £70 and not $50. Whereas I'm pretty sure that Resident Evil 4 Remake was £54. And in my eyes, it doesn't deserve to be that price, especially when, if you've been playing games for long enough, you've already got two other versions of that game. So for me, for example, back when The Last of Us released, I brought it on PlayStation 3, and then I brought the remaster on PlayStation 4, and now I've got the remaster on PlayStation 5. At the end of the day, that's what this is all about. It isn't often about what should happen morally or from a game historian point of view where we're trying to preserve all games that are not very easily playable these days. It always comes down to money. A game will get a remake or a remaster when a company believes that it is financially going to be a good decision. An example of this that I'm willing to call out in advance, God knows how long in advance, I'm willing to bet that we see a remaster or a remake one day for Bloodborne. Reason being is that Bloodborne has been almost forgotten on PlayStation 4. It is playable on PlayStation 5 for sure, but it is capped at 30 frames a second, and you can't even... there's nothing you can do to get ahead of that. They've never patched it to unlock the frame rate, given it a PS5 update, no remaster. I'm willing to bet that long term the plan will be one day we get a Bloodborne 2, and in the lead up to Bloodborne 2 we get a remaster or remake for Bloodborne 1. Because it'll make money. I also think that your perspective on remakes and remasters can be different depending on your age. So for example, I'm just about 25 and I, in front of me, have all of the consoles from PlayStation 2 up to today. All of them functioning, ready to play. So any game from PlayStation 2 onwards I can play pretty easily now. That is not the case for the majority of people, and therefore if a game is stuck on the PlayStation 2, that might make sense to remake for a modern audience because you guys will have an easier time playing it on your PlayStation 5, on your PlayStation 4 or your PC or your Xbox or whatever. And it's interesting, based upon the comments that I seem to get on my TikTok, we're at a point now where even the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360 are considered old enough that games need remasters just to be playable in modern day, when that is an example that I would really struggle to get my head around, because just from a hardware perspective, the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360 still function just fine today and look just fine. God of War 3 for the PlayStation 3 is still absolutely mind-blowing to play in terms of visuals. When we talk about this gaming accessibility, something that people don't often talk about is how those consoles connect to the modern hardware. That is a problem, you know? You watching this now, no matter how old you are, could very easily get yourself a PlayStation 2. The good thing about the PlayStation 2 being the most manufactured console of all time is that it's incredibly common and therefore not that expensive to get hold of one. The difficulty lies in actually connecting it to your modern TV, because it doesn't come with HDMI connections. It's SCART, component, or composite, and most TVs don't accept that signal these days. So you would have to look into an upscaler or other alternate solutions, and it just isn't convenient, you know? Whereas the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360, they function just the same as every console today does, just straight through HDMI. If a console can function via HDMI, I would struggle to find an argument that says that the games for it need a remaster. Another example of when I think a game could need a remaster, even though it's from the PS3 and Xbox 360 generation, is when it is a game that has been lost to time. You know, a lot of people these days buy their games digitally, and they can't get their head around people who collect physically. However, the problem with that is that you're at the mercy of the publisher's agreements with the console manufacturers. There's words there that I've got wrong, but the point is that there are a lot of games that you cannot buy digitally anymore. They're just gone. So even though they're easily playable if you have the console to play them, they're not easy games to get a hold of, because you can't just go on the PlayStation Store or the Xbox Marketplace and just buy them. An example of this would be the King Kong game for PlayStation 2 and Xbox 360. Now again, that's an obscure one, but it's a great game. It's considered one of the best movie license games of all time. And even though it's a 360 era game, it's not easy to get a hold of because you can't play it without having the physical disc. Games get delisted from the stores more often than you might think. Another example of a good game that isn't really very easily playable these days is Deadpool. Deadpool has even been remastered once. The Deadpool game came out for PlayStation 3, and then it was remastered for PlayStation 4. However, you can't download it digitally anymore. You can if you bought it back when it came out, don't get me wrong. If you buy something, you are always able to go and re-download it because you own the license to it. But if you've not paid for it and they remove the ability to buy that license, now you can no longer buy that game unless you own the disc physically. And in those instances, I think modern day remasters can also make a lot of sense. I think a lot of remakes and remasters prey on the nostalgia. Nostalgia is such an incredibly powerful emotion. There's nothing we all love more than nostalgia, looking back at the good times, because you don't know that the good times are there until they've gone. You try not to even remember the bad times. When you think back to the past, most of us try to think of the good times, and that's why nostalgia is so good. We all think back to playing Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 in the heyday. We all think back to the times we had with our friends. We don't remember the times where we spent hours raging at how broken things were, or laggy, or one-man army danger close noob tubes and things like that. So when it comes to preying on people wanting a remaster, that tends to be how this works. If something can be highly profitable and prey on somebody's nostalgia, that is usually a win-win for the company involved. Recently, I saw a rumour that was going around that Horizon Forbidden West? No, that's the first one. Horizon Zero Dawn. That Horizon Zero Dawn was getting a remaster, and that blows my mind. That is still one of the best looking games of all time on PlayStation 4. There is absolutely no need for that game to have a remaster. None. I think that a bit of the difficulty comes with, as graphics continue to get better, games that are not that graphically intensive like games are today. I get comments about this on TikTok sometimes when I play older games that I think look good, but other people are like, I can't believe this looks that bad, it needs a remaster. It's like, no. No, it doesn't. It just needs, it's just fine. It just needs to be playable in modern day. Another example of this is Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance. That is a game that could do with being more accessible in modern day. Would I say it needs a remaster? No, it's fine. It's pretty enough. It works just as it is. It's a PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 era game. So long as it's downloadable off the Xbox One Marketplace or the PlayStation Store, I think it works just fine and should be left alone. I think rather than as many remakes and remasters as we tend to get, we need more sequels to games that potentially are older, that could do with just being better. For example, I have high hopes about the Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 4 release that's coming out at some point. I reckon they're going to mess it up, because it's quite likely that they're going to mess it up, but I would rather them do a new one than remake one of the old ones and mess up something that holds such a good place in people's hearts. It would hurt more to have the same game made worse in modern day and those memories be soiled than have a whole new thing with fresh first impressions do badly. So yeah, to wrap this up, what do you guys think about remasters and remakes? Do you think we're getting too many of them? If you look at the majority of games that come out every year at the moment, so many of them are remakes and remasters. This year alone, Dead Space, Resident Evil, Silent Hill, those are the three off the top of my head, and I'm sure there are more than that. But 2 out of 3 of those so far have been absolutely amazing, and I would say warranted. Dead Space, it's accessible, but bringing it to a modern audience isn't a bad idea. So, for example, let's talk about that. In the instance of Dead Space, it's a good idea to remake that because it was an IP that was otherwise just completely dead. Sometimes remasters and remakes are a good way to bring back a deceased IP and have it be popular again. Dead Space, the people who made Dead Space, the company got dissolved, but now we have the Dead Space remake. It's amazing, everybody loves it, and we probably have a future in the Dead Space franchise again. I'm hoping the same thing happens with Silent Hill 2. It even happened with Resident Evil. The Resident Evil remasters and remakes helped bring the original essence of Resident Evil back to the modern day and make it good again. And now we have 2 series of Resident Evil games that are amazing. 7 onwards, amazing. 2 remake onwards, amazing. Maybe except for 3. So I think there's a lot of nuance to this discussion. Like I say, it depends on loads of things. There's so many different things that could go into factoring in whether a remake is worth it or not. But I think we can all agree that regardless of the reasoning, price is always something that should be influenced by the kind of remake and remaster it is. Like, I wouldn't have minded if Resident Evil 4 Remake cost more than it did because it was a proper remake, whereas a remaster that is just the same game re-released to higher graphics probably shouldn't be full price game, nor should a remake that changes very little on a game that already was pretty enough. I'm looking at you, Last of Us Part 1. Anyway, comment down below your thoughts. If you haven't already, like the video and go and watch this video up here. Thank you for watching. See you in a bit.